tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
One of the most worrying trends we have seen in Canada in the last couple of years has been the weaponization of the judicial process, and how, first off, absent the judicial process is when it comes to matters of civil liberty. But even when you look at the way that certain cases are prosecuted, we've all seen stories of this revolving door for people that are arrested for very violent or very despicable offenses, and they find themselves out on bail basically immediately. And then you have, in contrast with that, cases like that of Tamara Leach and Chris Barber, two of the organizers of the Freedom Convoy, who were arrested in February 2022, didn't go on trial until September 2023, and we are now 6 months later, and their trial is still underway with no immediately discernible or identified end in sight. Now, in the case of Tamara Leach, she languished behind bars, I think it was for about 49 days, if memory serves, whereas Chris Barber was fortunate enough to get released on bail not long after his arrest. But the cases of both of them, I think, raise significant questions about whether there is a politicization of the prosecution. You look in contrast to the case in Coutts 4. Now, this is a bit of a trickier one because there has been, for a lot of this, a publication ban around key details. So I haven't actually been able to talk about a lot of the case because of this limitation. But what we do know is that two of the Coutts 4 were released on lesser charges. The other two are still incarcerated, have been denied bail, and they are awaiting trial on charges of a conspiracy to kill police officers. Again, very serious charges, but they, like anyone else, have a right to their day in court. But I've heard more than ever before in the time I've covered crime and justice issues, people that simply do not trust the justice system. And there was a fascinating essay in the C2C journal about the worrisome wave of politicized prosecutions. It was written by Gwyn Morgan, who is a legend in the Canadian oil and gas sector. He was the CEO of Encana back when it was Encana, and also back when it was a Canadian company. And he's always been a tremendous supporter of True North. Good to have you back on. Thanks for coming today.
Oh, thank you. And the reason I have this patch on I'm not trying to be like the old Captain Morgan the pirate. It's really because I just had an eye operation. I have to have it on for a few days.
All right. Well, I hope you're healing up, and I appreciate you not letting it get in the way of our interview that's scheduled today. But so you've delved into this incredibly important issue here in the politicization of the political process. And I'm always clear to say that, we have to see in some of these cases, which are still ongoing, what the courts are going to find and what the facts are. But why was this bothering you so much, looking at this from the sidelines?
Well, when you look at this whole situation, when you talk about the truckers' convoy, the prosecution of them, there's been 8 persons associated with the convoys, both at Coutts and in Ottawa, who have served 9 years in jail without parole, with which what now a judge has ruled is not even a crime. And yet, we open the papers every few days and we see somebody killed by someone released on the catch and release system, committing a murder. A horrible murder. And so the only explanation for this, Andrew, is political interference in the justice system. And I think it starts at the top.
Do you think, let's unpack that for a moment, because do you think the issue is that there is a case of judges taking their marching orders, perhaps not explicitly, but implicitly, from political leaders? Or do you think it's just in who's getting appointed to the bench? Do you think it's just that leaders are appointing judges of a certain political persuasion, and this is just their bias on display?
Well, there's no doubt about the last part of that. I mean, the Supreme Court, head of the Supreme Court, just a recent, he's been appointed by Trudeau, and so the court is. There's no question the Supreme Court is now politicized to an extent that probably never before.
Yeah, and you had mentioned in your piece the story that I just shared on the show a moment ago of him doing an interview. And I mean, the idea of Supreme Court justices doing interviews, I think, is problematic for a number of reasons. This is one of them. But he gives his opinion about this issue that like anyone knows is going to end up before him as a case in some form, whether it's someone appealing their criminal charge or whether it's the Emergencies Act going before the Supreme Court. But he's already now put on record that he believes the Freedom Convoy was holding people hostage. So how is he expected to set that aside when he makes an adjudication on the convoy or a case related to it?
He can't be expected, and he won't. That's the problem. I mean, we've had is 8 persons arrested for participation in freedom convoys, and they have served 9 years, 9 years in jail without parole for something that now has been ruled not even it's been ruled by a recent judge. It's not even a crime.
So, where do you think this issue started, or when do you think it started? Because I would say that there have probably been, I think that the issues are a lot more explicit and in your face now, but I don't think this is a new phenomenon. I wouldn't even argue, and you may disagree, Gwen, that I wouldn't even argue it started with Justin Trudeau.
Well, I don't know. It seems like that's such a long time ago. My friend Stephen Harper wouldn't have had anything like this. So I think that the whole deterioration of the systems is consistent with the Trudeau reign, and his actions on the Emergencies Act itself were now seen to be as unnecessary and possibly illegal.
Yeah, and you had mentioned, just to go back to that point we were discussing a few moments ago about, whether this is, whether they're picking up implicit signals, these judges, or getting direct interference. No one seems interested in asking. I mean, that's the lack of curiosity from some of my colleagues in the media about these issues has been quite, maybe not astonishing, but disappointing.
Oh, one of the things in my column I spent quite a bit of time was how the terrible treatment of Tamara Lich,
Mm-hmm.
who's an Indigenous woman who went to help out with the communications and organization of the convoy, but she never committed a crime. And she has been persecuted continuously. And one of the things, and her case is still going on. It's still going on today, and the trial will resume soon. And yet, this woman has been persecuted beyond reason, and because that can only happen if there's direction from the top.
Well, and the thing I would also point out in the case of Tamara Lich is that, like, the argument for keeping her behind bars, because I think it was 19 days she was released and then rearrested for another 30 days. So I think 49 was the total. I might be, give or take one or two. But she was unvaccinated. She couldn't board a plane. She wasn't a flight risk. She wasn't violent. She wasn't at risk to reoffend because the protest was over. Like, there was no defensible reason to keep her incarcerated. And especially when you contrast it with all of these catch and release policies that you've alluded to, where people who are reoffending are being just sent out of jail immediately after their arrest.
Well, this is a petite woman who was charged with committing the offenses of obstructing police officers and endangering the public. This little woman, and she was marched to a jail, thrown down into a cell and then eventually put into another part of the jail system, and back and forth. And her trial's still going on. She's still being persecuted. And the prosecutor himself has said that they want to make a special case to teach her a lesson. And when that happens, how can that otherwise happen without if either implicit or explicit interaction?
Well, and that's an important point, because ideally, if you are, yes, sentencing is in a roundabout way meant to be a deterrent. But when you're on trial, you want the case to be about you and your conduct and your actions, not you as a symbol for society that the prosecution wants to punish. And they have done that with Tamara, and they've been very explicit about that. They don't want to just put her on trial. They want to put the whole convoy on trial through her.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And you probably saw that recently a judge came out and actually ruled that there was no crime committed. with the Freedom Convoy protest.
Yeah, well, that it wasn't an emergency. The federal court decision that, basically the entire premise of this national emergency just did not exist. Yeah. No, very, very well said. It was a great piece in C2C Journal called "The Worrisome Wave of Politicized Prosecutions." I don't think you could hear me when I did my initial introduction, but I said you were a legend in oil and gas, and I'm grateful for your work at the helm of Encanada, which is neither a Canadian nor called Encana anymore. So you're a representative of the glory days of that. But Gwyn Morgan, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.